Welcome to Analysis. I'm John Rees. Now, there have been many dark moments for the Palestinian people in the nearly 2 years of the Israeli attack on Gaza. But this moment may be the darkest of all as the starvation and ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip reaches new depths. US President Donald Trump seems content to underwrite any Israeli action in Gaza, no matter that it threatens the extermination of the Palestinian population. But amidst the darkness, there is light. The international movement of solidarity with Palestine is gathering support with every day that passes. An unprecedented number of nations are now poised to recognise the Palestinian state, and international protest and boycotts are more extensive than ever, and Israeli politicians are complaining that the Netanyahu government has led to Israel becoming an outcast state. Here in the UK, the Palestinian movement is stronger than ever, and so are government attempts to repress it. We have this report. The Starmer government's crackdown on Palestine protests became even more severe this week, with the dawn arrests of 7 leaders of the Defend Our Juries organisation. Defend Our Juries are the organisers of the Parliament Square protests against the banning of Palestine action under anti-terror laws. At the same time, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has won the right to try and prevent a judicial review of the ban, previously granted to Palestine action by a High Court judge. Meanwhile, the prosecutions of the leaders of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the Stop the War Coalition and CND are continuing, as is the prosecution of Irish band NECAP under the terrorism laws. The new arrests of the Defend Our Juries leaders resulted in 7 individuals being charged with 43 offences under the anti-terror laws. The defendants are subject to repressive bail conditions, including curfews, ankle tags, and no access to tech without police approval. This comes as a result of attending a Zoom meeting to organise a peaceful protest. Amnesty International condemned the government's crackdown. The reaction of the Palestinian Solidarity Movement has been to redouble the level of mobilisation at a crucial moment for Palestinians who now face mass starvation and ethnic cleansing at the hands of the Israeli state. Tomorrow we'll see the 30th national demonstration in London in support of the Palestinians and another Defend Our Juries action in Parliament Square protesting at the use of anti-terror laws against Palestinian activists. Organisers say that the Palestinian demonstration will be one of the largest of the last 2 years, and the Defend Our Juries says that 1,000 people have agreed to participate in their action. So, can government repression work, and what are the prospects for the recognition of the Palestinian state? Indeed, can Gaza survive? Well, to discuss all this, I'm joined by Chris Nylam, who's the Vice Chair of the Stop the War Coalition, and by James Smith, who's aboard one of the ships in the latest flotilla to Gaza, yet to leave port. Welcome to the programme, both of you. James, just describe for us, first of all, what the latest flotilla is about and when you expect to leave.
Having me and for the opportunity to speak about the flotilla. This is the largest coordinated flotilla action organised in solidarity, of course, with Palestine and the Palestinian people and against Israel's brutal regime, the occupation, apartheid and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people that now has culminated in the ongoing genocide, not only in Gaza, but throughout occupied Palestine. There are hundreds of participants involved in the flotilla, boats leaving from throughout Europe and North Africa over the course of the next couple of days. Individuals from 40, 50 different countries and approximately 50 vessels. This, of course, follows a long line of flotilla direct actions that stretch back to the early 2000s. And, of course, are part of this wider Palestine solidarity movement supported by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in the UK, the Stop the War Coalition, many others globally. And as you say, John, this is the most significant moment for the Palestine Solidarity Movement, certainly in my lifetime, in terms of the size and energy and coordination behind that movement, driving forward calls for not only a ceasefire, but the realization of liberation and a free Palestine.
James, it seems just from watching some of the film reports of the various departure points for the flotilla, not only is it the largest flotilla in terms of the number of ships, but in general we saw a huge demonstration on the port side and Barcelona as well. So it seems to have sort of generated an echo, within those societies where the boats are leaving as well.
Absolutely. I mean, these are movements that are in communication with one another. There's obviously the solidarity movement in the UK and in London, where I'm normally based. Protests the world over, bigger and more frequently than, as I say, I've seen in my lifetime, and certainly many protests related to the flotilla. Now they are there to see off the boats, but of course the protests are about what's happening in Palestine and what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people. As you say, there have been big protests in Barcelona. The Genoa dock workers stating very clearly that they will be acting to prevent the transfer of military weaponry through European ports, and protests elsewhere as well in Sicily and in many other locations.
Chris Nyland from Stop the War Coalition, let me come to you. First of all, we'll talk about the state of the protest movement in Britain in a moment, but first of all, let me just get your opinion about the possibility of wider recognition now for the Palestinian state. Crucial debates coming up at the UN. Now, most countries in the world do already recognise the Palestinian state, and I guess the significance of the debates now will be that some of the most resistant to that call in the major imperial powers are now looking as if they're at least partially going to move in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big development. France and Britain as well look as if they're going to, and other European countries, look as if they are going to recognise Palestine, which at one level is a purely rhetorical move because it doesn't change the situation on the ground. But nevertheless, it is also a recognition that they are the kind of pro-Israel Western powers. And after all, the UK is the biggest supporter of the Americans' position and has been the most kind of pro-Israel of all the European countries. The fact that they are now having to make this rhetorical concession is significant. It helps us. It means putting the argument for support of the Palestinian people is much, much easier. And it also represents the fact that there is a huge wellspring of support for Palestine. I mean, we've had a big movement now for 2 years. Well, there's been a big movement for much longer than that. But this kind of spectacular, unprecedented street movement with all the other aspects and elements of it over the last 2 years, I think in the last 5-6 months, the movement's broken out beyond, the kind of activist base, way beyond the activist base, and it's now articulating the opinion of the vast majority of people in Britain. So that's a real step forward, and I think it's that has precipitated this situation where Keir Starmer, who after all has been taking absolutely appalling positions from the very beginning of this crisis, is now forced to eat his words and to reverse his position. And as I say, I think it's, at one level, to say it's too little too late is a kind of gross understatement. But nevertheless, in the circumstances, it is a significant step forward, and we have to embrace it. We have to use it. We have to help make it a kind of platform for increasing the scale of the mobilisations, for stepping up the movement, and for forcing him into a position where he's got to move from rhetoric to actions that will make a difference.
James, I'm wondering if you feel that the flotilla has a kind of, peripheral level of support. I mean, we've talked about the demonstrations, but obviously there's a whole technical level of support just to mount a flotilla on this scale. Do you feel that that's also part of this widening support for Palestine?
Absolutely, John. I mean, hundreds of people may well be participating in terms of being physically present on the boats, but we are talking about thousands, tens of thousands of people who've offered support in different towns and cities and port towns across Europe and North Africa and elsewhere. We have participants in the movement who have sold vehicles to be able to afford flight tickets, a grandfather of several grandchildren, a mother and her two daughters, both in their 20s, on board, people from, as I say, 40 or 50 different countries, and many, many thousands who are behind them providing support, be it, shuttling people from airports and train stations to harbours, or providing food or a bed for the night. And this, of course, again, I don't want to sort of speak too much about the flotilla when really what we're talking about here is the wider Palestine solidarity movement. And I agree with absolutely everything that Chris has just said. This is not just the sort of activist, street-based sort of protest that we're seeing here, though they are, of course, the more visible dimension of the wider Palestine solidarity movement. Similarly with the flotilla, there's a kind of a profound visual aesthetic there. But we're talking about the vast majority of publics the world over who are openly and explicitly in support of a free Palestine and against Israel's ongoing genocide and occupation of the Palestinian territories.
Chris, let me just talk to you now a little bit about the state's reaction and the police's reaction to the movement in Britain. I mean, there was a time a few months back when it looked as if perhaps the level of repression in some European countries was higher than it was in Britain, but the British state's been doing its best to catch up. There's now multiple people, both from Stop the War and PSC, and now a whole number more people from the Palestine Action, now facing very serious court proceedings. As we said in the report at the head of the programme, another 7 people from the Defend Our Juries organisation that's simply complaining about the treatment of Palestine Action. They haven't actually taken out any of the actions that Palestine Action were originally arrested for. So there's a spreading stain of repression now, isn't there, in Britain?
Yeah, it's a very serious situation, which was perfectly and in a very sinister way encapsulated by the dawn raids on the houses of the Defend Our Juries organisers, which is something that, to be honest, just a year ago would have seemed perhaps a little bit beyond the imagination of people in this country. It's a very, very big attack on civil liberties. It's a very, very serious clampdown. And one of the more ludicrous aspects of it is that the police announced today that no one will be allowed on the demonstration tomorrow to bang pots and pans or any percussive instruments. Because, well, we don't know why exactly, but...
So just let me get that straight. If you bang a drum, you could be arrested?
Well, that's the implication of what they're saying, which is extraordinary. And one of the aspects of this situation which is very clear is that the Palestine movement is being singled out for special treatment here. We're being told that we can't demonstrate anywhere in the vague vicinity of a synagogue at the very same time where, as the police are facilitating protests by the far right outside asylum hotels, as everyone knows, as everyone has seen on social media. So there's a special treatment going on here for the Palestine movement. And I think what that shows is, I think it kind of connects to what we were saying a little bit earlier, because I guess what is happening here is that the government and the establishment in general are aware of the fact that they're losing the argument, that their attempts to demonise us and marginalise us in political terms have failed, that, the sentiment, which was already fairly sympathetic to Palestine, has now gone full on across the country to support for the Palestinians, really. Obviously there's a minority who's still holding out, but in the face of that kind of ideological disaster for the establishment, they're resorting to outright repression. I think that's what's going on. Now, I don't think it's going to work, by the way. I mean, obviously, it's absolutely awful for the people who are facing it, but nevertheless, so far at least, really ever since the January the 18th attack on our demonstrations, what has happened is that the police actions have led to people coming out in greater numbers. And that seems to be the trend. And I think in a way that's not surprising, because once a state sort of loses consensus and starts to use more coercion, it can actually deepen the crisis. I think that's a historical fact, and I think that's what we're seeing right now, which doesn't make it any the less dangerous. I mean, it is part of a broader authoritarian trend in the world, to be honest, and it's obviously something that we have to campaign very, very hard against. But I think it's just at the moment, anyway, it's riling people up even more, and it's leading to a stronger and deeper movement.
James, obviously, if we're talking about repression, that's certainly been handed out directly by the Israeli state to previous flotillas. And if we go back to a previous generation, to the Mavi Marmara, indeed the fatal use of force against the flotillas. That's obviously a concern for you? How do you deal with that kind of mentally and practically with an operation like the one that you're involved in?
You're absolutely right. I mean, again, the Palestine solidarity movement has been repressed, be it on the streets of London, be it in the occupied West Bank, be it in international waters attempting to break Israel's illegal siege. Israel, of course, uses the most extreme forms of militarized authoritarianism to clamp down on Palestinians themselves and those who show support. But those Western states that have until now shown, and still to this day show, unfettered support for the Israeli regime, are deploying those same authoritarian tactics. Of course, that there are concerns, as with each of the previous flotillas. The risk analyses are done, but the motivation to do this work, to expose Israel's crimes, is what drives people forward. This is a peaceful flotilla comprising non-violent Palestine solidarity activists who are trying to break Israel's illegal siege, bring humanitarian aid into Gaza, but more importantly, expose not only the violence of Israel's siege and blockade and occupation of Gaza, the violence that, of course, is inherent to Israel's genocide, but also expose the failure of Western states that have failed to uphold their political, legal, and moral obligations. And such, it falls to citizens of the world to literally take to the sea to try and do some of this work themselves. I mean, this is just the most horrific situation that we're seeing here. And people, of course, resort to direct action, be it street-level protests in London, be it blockading arms factories and decommissioning military hardware, or be it, jumping on a boat and sailing towards Gaza, when legal and political systems fail to uphold the principles of equality, accountability, and justice. And that's what we've seen not just over the last 2 years, but for decades, approaching, well, more than a century now with respect to Palestine. And again, it falls to citizens, good people who believe in these principles, the principles of humanity and justice, and that want to see them upheld and enacted, to go ahead and do that work. That's why we're seeing direct action flourish the world over now with respect to the Palestine solidarity movement.
Chris, I mean, obviously the Palestine movement is an international movement, but as yet there hasn't been a sort of physical expression of that, perhaps in the way that there was during the Iraq War, when the huge social forums in Florence, indeed the the Florence Social Forum was the one that called the International Day of Action on the Iraq War for the 15th of February. But there is an international conference coming up, isn't there, in Paris next month, organised jointly by Stop the War and French MPs from Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you're right to say that, on the one hand, there is, right across the world, there is a growing movements in support of Palestine, but there hasn't really been a way of articulating that and making it and coordinating it, which I would say is something of a weakness. And there are a number of initiatives to try and overcome this. One of them is, as you say, a conference that is taking place in Paris on the 4th and 5th of October, which is an international or a European conference with other international speakers coming along, which is going to try and start to address this problem, try to increase the level of coordination, but also link it to the wider debates taking place around militarism across Europe, because obviously this is about Palestine, but it's also about a growing drive to war that is being pursued partly by Trump, but very much by the European leaders who are, as you know, rearming, pushing for more military spending, and, in various different ways, pushing for more support for Ukraine, for the kind of proxy war against that the West is fighting against Russia. So this conference is going to be very big. Apparently, they've booked a venue for 4,000 people. There's going to be people from across Europe, lots of trade unionists coming, the movements from around Europe, but also from the US, are going to address the conference. So I think it will be a real step forward. And there's the possibility of a follow-up conference taking place in England the year after. So, yeah, I mean, big invite to anyone who's interested to come to the Against the War conference taking place in Paris on the 4th and 5th of October.
And James, finally, we're running out of time, but do just give us quickly some sense of what the timing of the flotilla is. When should people be looking out to hear news of it departing?
So in the coming days, there are boats in Tunis, in Menorca, various Italian port cities, and Sicily as well, that will be moving. Dates are still fluid, and folks can follow the flotilla tracker online. Forensic Architecture has provided the technical support so that people can monitor the flotilla, and of course the flotilla will be posting regular updates as the situation develops and evolves.
OK, well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. My thanks to Chris Nynham there, the Vice Chair of the Stop the War Coalition, for joining us, and to Dr. James Smith, who's on board one of the boats that will be leaving for Gaza as part of the latest Gaza flotilla. But do join us for future episodes of Analysis. I'm afraid now, though, for this evening, that's all. Good night.